first slide.
We are rolling. We are on the air.
Are we live?
Millions
Welcome
of people.
back, everyone. Hi out there. Let's JavaScript, shall we? I believe when we left off, we were finishing right about here. Okay. So we have now covered what I would call the traditional JavaScript for WordPress content, right? So we've looked at how to enqueue stuff in a plugin or theme. We've looked at how to localize scripts and pass data into them. And then we looked at some basic Ajax. We didn't look at the example using Axios, but there is definitely a shift away from using jQuery for Ajax. And if you don't want to use native fetch, I'm actually a big fan of fetch, which is kind of the replacement for XML HTTP request. But Axios is probably the library that most people are using now for their Ajax-y stuff. So we looked at all that, and what we're going to focus on now is the WordPress REST API. Now, if you've used an API, it's a pretty simple thing. You basically go to a URL with this one in a browser, and it gives you a bunch of data. So the question on how to use an API really lays down to two things. The first one is, what method are we going to use to get the data? And that's going to be using Axios for our Ajax call. And then the second thing is, well, what are we going to do with the data once we have it? And that is JavaScript it. You do whatever you want with the data. It's raw data. Decide what you want to do, and go ahead and build it out. So we'll start off now with just looking at it in the browser, and then we'll move into building out some little demo apps and sites/theme things. OK? So let's come into our project files. And you want to go into section 4 on WordPress REST API. And you'll notice that these are not themes. They're not plugins. All it is a simple README file. So I'm just going to open this up in my editor so I can see it here. Show it with y'all.
Oh, we need to pause for a second. Sorry about that.
OK.
.1 you said?
Yeah, we're going to do 4.1, 4.2. And did thumbs up if you've already copied 4.3 inside that folder into your plugins.
Is yours showing up?
And in the game. What I'm talking
Is
about.
it showing up on the website?
Folks, if you could do that now, that'll just save some time later. Inside 4.3, the JS4WP simple posts endpoint, copy that into your plugins folder.
So the themes are all showing up on mine, but not the 4.3.
4.3, make sure you don't copy the folder 4.3, copy the folder inside of it into your plugins folder.
Right,
It's not.
That I didn't do.
Yeah, cool.
OK, and you can just pick up from where you left off. You don't have to start over.
Oh dear, I don't remember. I hope it goes OK. OK, where were we? Let's look at the REST API. I think that's where. Oh, we were looking at the files. OK, so I just opened them. All right, we're Blanus. OK, so I'm in 4.1, and all it is a README, because we're going to be accessing all this stuff in the browser. So this is just instructions on what to do and how we could do that. So you're going to pull up yoursite.com/wp-json. And what we get here is the root of our API, or the index of it. And if you've worked with APIs before, this is actually fairly common for a REST API, that when you access the main root, you get information about what's in the API itself. So once we do that, we should see that API, and we'll look at that together, and that should be pretty clear. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to do something like, actually, you know what? Yeah, I'll skip the slides. Then we're going to, no, I got to go back. Sorry. Let me show you this first. These are all the possible routes. This is better to look at first. So if we go to site.com/wp-json, that's what we call the root of our API access point. So in any site now that has WordPress API enabled, which is pretty much every current version of WordPress, unless you go out of your way to disable it, you could access all their public data via this structure. So notice that we can get posts, post revisions, categories, tags, pages, comments, taxonomies, medias, users, types, statuses, and settings. Now, some of these have protected settings. So the general public couldn't just go in and look at all your usernames. And some things don't necessarily behave how you might expect. Like if you have 100 users, but only one of them has published a blog post or published a page on your site, and the other people are just subscribers, you will only see one user when you go to users. So users are only going to be someone who would show up like in your authors section as an author on your site anyways. The other thing that we have access to are custom endpoints. So plugins are really big with this. If you're familiar with WooCommerce, which is the go-to e-commerce solution along with Easy Digital Downloads, a little bit simpler, also very popular, you'll see something like woo/v something else, and then it will have a bunch of endpoints. And it's also possible to create your own custom endpoints. And this is something that's important to mention. One of the examples we'll look at in a moment here is going to be a custom endpoint that basically provides post data simplified. Because what you'll see when you go into /posts and you get a post data, it's going to have a ton of data there. And there's actually several queries to the database that have to go on. It has to make one query to get the title and the content. It has to make another one to necessarily get like the name of the author, another one to get this piece of data. So it is often pulling together more than one thing at a time, or just because it has to get so many different things, it could be expensive. So when people talk about the benefits of the WordPress REST API and talk about speed as one of the largest things, this is not necessarily true out of the box. Just because you use JavaScript and just because you use an API doesn't mean it's going to be fast. You have to use it in a performant way and be intelligent about what you're doing and try to write performant code. So for that reason, what I have seen from a lot of professionals in the field that are kind of leading the edge in terms of using WordPress as an API is that they do not very often leverage the default endpoints because they can be quite heavy. What they do instead is figure out exactly what data they need and then go and write some custom endpoints and just get that exact data, and then everything's going to be a little bit lighter, a little bit faster. So you'll have an example of how to do that. To really go deep, you're going to need to know some PHP, but this will be a good start. The other thing about this is that whereas we go to this URL to get all of our posts, if we were to do this, there we go. If we add the ID to the end of it, then we're going to get back a specific post. So same is true of pages, media, all of these different endpoints. If you put / and then an ID number after it in some sort of format that's a little bit different for some of them, then you're going to get just that one post or just that one page. So again, this will get us all our posts. This will get us one post with the ID of 1. This will get us all our pages. Guess what this will do? Get us a page with an ID of 1, right? This is not right. Made the example a little too easy. Okay, so you need that in it. And with this up, I could talk about a few things in terms of the namespacing and how endpoints work. So you'll notice that we have, I'm sorry, let me open that up again.
You just added -JSON?
Yeah, I added -JSON, which is absolutely essential. It will not work if you try to go to /wp/v2. So wp-json will get us to our root index. WP will get us just WordPress endpoints. So like I said, if there are plugins installed like Jetpack, WooCommerce, more and more plugins now are starting to ship with their own custom endpoints. Instead of WP there, you'd see custom, or you'd see WooCommerce, or you'd see Jetpack, or you'd see God Bless You, or whatever it is, and then whatever version they're on. So they're not necessarily going to be on version 2, right? They might be on version 1, they might be on version 6. WordPress just happens to be on version 2, and once they go to version 3, the nice thing is that with this kind of syntax, if you want to keep using version 2, it won't break anything. So if versioning was left off, let's say it was just /wp/pages/1, and then WordPress updated and changed its underlying architecture of how the API is returning data, it'll break everything. So that's why you want to have that versioning included and why it's there. And why the WP is there is because you can also get other endpoints from other plugins and things like that. Okay. So another thing that we could do is we could pass arguments into the API URLs and customize what we get back. So what I mean by that is, let's say we're going to get all of the pages on our site. Wait, this is duplication. Sorry. Let's say we're going to get all of our posts here, right? If we were to add this query string, now this would all appear in one line. I'm just doing it to break it up and show you the possible order. Now what we're going to get is limited to 10 pages. It's going to have embedded data, so this makes an extra query, and it pulls in even more data associated with that post. We're going to find things that only have the search phrase hello world, and I wanted to show this as an example. If you put a space bar or a space in the URL as we're typing it in, it'll actually work. And if you put this, %20, which anybody who tried to put a space in a URL, you know what that does, that will be valid spaces and work for you. So you could do search for certain posts. And then another big one that's really common is order by and order. So order is only going to be ascending or descending, and order by could be like title, it's date by default, it could be other things as well. So it's worth taking a look over at the documentation, and let me just start at the home page for the REST documentation. This is stuff you're going to want to get familiar with. You're going to want to bookmark it or put it up there because there's a lot of data in here that's important for you to know. And particularly when you're first starting off, remember how I showed you there were various different endpoints that you could access? Well, here they are, and here's the documentation on all of them. So if I wanted to find out what arguments I could pass to getting a list of posts, I could click on argument, and you could see now, okay, how many per page, the search, after, so things published after a certain date, published by a certain author, not published by an author, before a certain date, so you could get a date range, right, if you pass before and after dates. You could exclude certain things, include certain things, offset, order. Offset is helpful for pagination, right? So you could say get 10, and then the next time give me the next 10 after the first 10. The order by, get something by a slug, by certain status, categories, tags. Basically anything you'd want to query something by, we could do that. So when we talk about how to get data from the WordPress REST API, writing an AJAX request is pretty simple at this point, right? There's a bunch of different tools we could use for it. So it's really going to be a matter of getting comfortable with the different arguments that are possible to get us exactly what it is that we're looking for. And we don't have enough time today. We're going to play around with passing some of these just so you get comfortable with it. But you really need a lot of time because not only are there posts, but then there's media. And media could have slightly different arguments that could be passed to it, just like comments are going to have different arguments. So this will be something you will, at a certain point, if you decide to go forward with the WordPress REST API and are building apps with it or projects, use this documentation, take the time to explore what's possible. And the cool thing is we could do all this from the browser, so it's pretty simple to play around with. Or if you have other tools that you like Postman, I'm not going to be using that here, but that's a pretty common one for exploring APIs. So again, we could pass as many of these that we want, but I do want to draw your attention again to embed. Notice how it doesn't follow the same format as the rest of them. It could be chained in the same way, but embed is just underscore embed. It takes no argument or value, or it takes no value. And what that is going to do, we'll look at in a second, and you'll see that it gets even more data. But remember that the more data you try to pull in, the more expensive that query, the more potential time you may be waiting. And way down the road, outside the scope of this, there are discussions around, okay, can we even cache certain API endpoints to make them even faster, and how do we go about the best way of doing that? So once you get the data, that's one thing, and then you could worry about making it even more performant. But here's what we're going to do with practice. We're first going to, I'll give you a few exercises, which is where we just switched back from, on how to access the endpoints. We'll do it on your site, and then we'll play around. We'll have a few minutes to play around with arguments, so you could try searching or this or that. This is where you need some content in your site. So if you haven't installed FakerPress, or if you haven't added some dummy text or some dummy posts, go ahead and do that as part of this practice. And then there is a plugin in the 4.3 folder that if you install, it will set up a custom endpoint. And after these exercises, I want to show you how that's done because, like I said, most people are going the direction of, rather than just using completely default WordPress APIs, they're trimming them down, making them faster, and just getting only the data they need and nothing else. So let's go ahead and take a practice with this, shall we? Now we could open up to 4.1, and we could see this will make a little bit more sense now. So first it's telling you, go ahead and access the root of your URL, the root of your API, and see what's there. And we'll look at that together. And then go ahead and try to access posts and pass an ID to it. Now, you might not have a post ID one for some reason. It might have been deleted or something happened. So I'll show you how in the admin area to figure out exactly what ID a post has with it. And then go to pages, and you should see a list of pages. And then we'll have a little bit of time to go to the other ones. So go to media, go to users, go to those other ones, try creating a second user, that sort of thing. Okay? So let's go ahead and open up our sites and take a look at the WP-JSON root. So if I go to mysite.com/WP-JSON, now let's try something. Let's go to frontendmasters.com/WP-JSON. Okay, this will be more fun. You go to your sites. We'll pull up this live one.
Can we enlarge the font?
Yeah, I will. I'm kidding. I'm not really going to do that. Sorry, the font is now. Oh. Just kidding. I will look at Frontend Masters while I'm booting up my own site. Okay. So again, this is what's called the index. Sorry, I just need to reboot my thing's freezing up. Are y'all seeing it okay?
Is there a plugin to make it look all organized?
Oh yeah, there's a really nice one. It is called, thank you for that.
JSON View.
JSON Beautifier, is that the one?
That's for WordPress, really?
No, it's a Chrome extension. There was one and then it wasn't there anymore. Okay, I think it's JSON View. I'm not sure which one I'm using. There's a few of them, but different browsers have different ones, and you definitely want to install one of these. That is an awesome question. Thank you.
I'm JSON Viewer.
JSON Viewer is another one. Yeah, grab one of them because otherwise your JSON looks like
A big blob.
a big blob of. And why is my?
Is it your pointer thing that's not working?
My scroll isn't working.
Wow. that
Sorry,
is
give me a moment here.
a nice change.
At this point, I'm just like,
Do you want to reboot?
Okay. I think I'm back in business. Okay, here we go. So if you ever wanted to get the name of your site, what's the URL of it? Again, you kind of have to have the URL in order to get the URL, so that's a little bit silly. But definitely remember how we passed in blog info name or blog info description through localized scripts before? Now if we need that data, we could just hit our main JSON endpoint and convert this into an object and get .name. And it will be the name of our site. The namespaces is another important thing. So remember how I said there are certain plugins that you can install that will give you other namespaces? So soon we're going to look at authenticating with JavaScript web tokens or JSON web tokens. So that adds its own endpoint for authenticating. I have this simple one here that's adding it. There's an OEmbed one because if you take a WordPress site URL and embed it in another WordPress site, it'll do a certain design and like frame it all pretty. So that's there. We don't have authentication, anything in there. The biggest one we want to look at is in routes. And so if I start toggling some of these down, notice that now we're starting to see the routes that I pulled up before. And not only do we have things like pages, but then you could pass an ID into it. And there's a revisions one, media. And there's some other information we'll see here, which are the methods. So it's a little bit outside of the scope to get into the depths of HTTP as much as I would love to. But each route will let you know what you could do to that route. So if we're on media, we could get media objects, and we could post media objects. If we come down to media with a specific ID, we could get that specific media item. We could post new ones. We could also put and patch, which are versions of updating, so it's only going to update that certain information you need. And we could delete it. Why do you think you can't delete all your media at once? Well, probably because you probably don't want to do that, right? So that doesn't exist because it would wipe out your entire media library. They're going to assume, hey, if you really want to delete something, then you've got to go ahead and tell us specifically what it is that you want to delete. So this has a lot of different information about everything that we're looking for, and this is our root, or our index, and we're done. So now let's go to the next one in the exercise. WP v2 posts 1. So we put /WP /v2 /posts /1. Does everybody get a 1? If you don't have that, let me show you something. So if I go into all my posts and I open up a specific post, up here in the browser it'll say post is equal to, mine's saying 1.28. If you ever need to get the ID of a post, you could get it that way. So go into the admin area, go to all your posts or all your pages, click on a specific one, get something that has a valid ID. Or if you go to all posts, you'll see all your posts, and it will tell you the ID right there. Okay? But let's go back to posts /1 or posts 8, whatever gives you the data. So at this point, what we could do is explore what data is available to us. And every time you go to a different endpoint, it's going to have different data available. But this is all of the basic post information you need. We have things like the ID. If you ever wanted to link directly to a URL, if you put this ID in with $P equals, it will automatically redirect you to the right URL structure for your site. We could get some date formats, the slug, the status, the link to it. Now this is important. Notice how title is title and then rendered inside of it. So we can't just call post.title. We have to call post.title.rendered, and then we get what we want. And the reason is because if we authenticate and make this same request, we're going to get more access to more data. So for example, we could get things like the raw data before it's filtered, or before different paragraph tags or line breaks are put in and things like that. So there are, for title, content, and excerpt, usually we want to use .rendered, and we can never do just .title on its own. So it's like a little weird thing that you'll get comfortable with. Notice then we've got the author, there's no featured media. If there was, there'd be detail there. And then a lot of metadata, so it just links to the author and all this other information. Watch what happens, though, when you put !_embed, and go ahead and type this in on your own. So what this does is now if I scroll down, under links, I have _embedded. So previously, all I had about the author was their ID. But now WordPress is going to go, sorry, let me make this a little bit bigger. Now WordPress is going to go when I say get the embedded content, and it will get all of this information about the author. Their description, the links to their Gravatar images, their name, if they've changed it, the slug to them, all this other information, right? It also will get us replies. So if there are comments, it will pull that in. And then WP term. So this will get us, before we had categories. Categories and tags are part of a larger term in WordPress called taxonomies. And so a category could be considered a term. And so this will get us not just the ID, but the actual category name, right? So this is more helpful for us a lot of the time, and this is why we would use embed. Now, a lot of folks use embed and pretty regularly, but making all these extra requests to pull in all the author data, all the reply data, and all the term data, especially the more and more you have, then that makes the request more expensive. So again, you really want to be thinking about, just because it is possible to do it and get more data, is it the smart thing to do, right? Let's look at one last example. Go to Pages. And Pages should have all of your pages. I've only got one page, but it's got my content here. Notice that again, title.rendered will give us the title, and content.rendered will give us our content. And the same thing happens where we have like the author, but no author information. But if we put !_embed, then when we come down underneath the links, then we've got all the author information again. No replies because it's not a comment, but we have that those extra details. Cool? So what we'll do is let's just put like 2 minutes on the clock or something and try accessing some of these ones. Okay? So I'll leave this up. We already did post pages. See if you could find specific IDs. If not, just put them up. And again, you might only have one uncategorized category, so then go and try adding some more, assigning it to a page. Really see how things adapt and change and what format you'll get it back in. Now we're done with the API. You got all the data. We're done, right? Let's build something. Let's see what else we want to mention. Hey, Mark, I am not in the chat at the moment. If you see anything, will you just let me know?
For what?
I'm not in the chat, I just realized.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So if I
That's
miss
fine.
anything, let me know.
Yeah, no problem.
Cool, thanks. Oh. Does anybody want more time? You feel okay? Okay. Cool. So let's see what we got next here.
Let me know when you're coming back.
Okay, we can come back.
Okay,
Okay, so the next thing I want to do is make sure that you copy the Simple Posts endpoint plugin. Oops. Uh-oh. I think that was it. Simple Posts endpoint. Okay, make sure you put that in the plugins folder, and then come into your plugins area. We'll make sure all our old stuff is deactivated, and then make sure to activate this Simple Posts endpoint. And what this does is then on your site at .com/simple/v1/posts, you could see some even more trimmed down data about posts. So let's go ahead and copy this from WP-JSON all the way into the posts and put this in our URL. So notice now I'm getting all my posts still, but look at the simplicity of this. Remember before we had title.rendered and we had the GUD and we had all the date modifications and all this other stuff? Now all we have is the simple ID, URL, slug, title, excerpt, content. Boom, done, right? So obviously this is going to be faster for the query to build and to get out to your site, and it's going to be faster to process. So this again is my recommendation for trying to slim stuff down a little bit. And let's just take a quick moment and look at the code here behind it. So go ahead and open up that folder, JS4WP Simple Post Endpoint, and then open that main plugin file. Again, this is PHP, and my expectation is not necessarily that you'll walk away knowing how to do this. There is pretty good documentation on the site that I showed you before, but the different pieces should make sense. So first of all, I'm registering my route and I'm telling them what it's going to be. So it's going to be /simple/v1, and then I'm only going to have posts available. You could only get posts, so I'm not going to let anybody save or delete posts with my code. And then if somebody hits this, what should they do? Well, that's going to load this callback function, which will tell WordPress what to do. So coming down into that, first we set up some arguments for this getPosts function. So again, this is kind of PHP stuff, but this is one of the simple ways in WordPress to get a bunch of posts. So here I'm saying -1 means get me all the posts. So if I had set this to 3, it would have limited it, and there's a bunch of arguments. You could search for get posts if you want to do more on this. It's documented pretty well. If there aren't any posts, don't do anything. But then if there are posts, so if I get posts back, then for each post, go ahead and create a new simple post that only has this specific data, right? So I'm getting my post here. This is a for each loop. And then I'm saying set ID equal to ID, set URLs equal to the unique ID, set the slug, set the title, set the excerpt. This is going to apply any HTML to it so that you get access to that HTML. Otherwise, it might come out unformatted, which you don't want. And then push those all to this one array and feedback that array. So this is enough if you needed a custom media one, if you needed a custom comment, or anything that you wanted to trim down, you should be able to tweak this and get to where you need to go. But if we come into the browser now and go to Simple V1, we see exactly that, right? If I were to comment out some of these and maybe I only wanted titles back, then it would trim it down even more. But notice that once we make this request and get our posts, it doesn't really matter what data we add. It's not really going to slow it down too much. It's how many more other requests we need to then go make on top of that. So like if I wanted to pull in the author name, that's a whole nother request on top. So again, just stuff to think about. And really, that is all we need to know about practicing and getting comfortable with the WordPress REST API. So I'll pause here at this point just to see if there are any questions about anything that we've covered up to this point in terms of endpoints, arguments, or custom endpoints. Cool. Well played. So let's move on then and talk about actually accessing and using the API inside of WordPress. So again, there's two ways we can go with working with the API. We could use it in a plugin or theme inside of WordPress, which means that we have a lot of authentication already handled for us out of the box. Or we could do it completely decoupled, which means we need to go through all the process of authenticating via an API. So when we're using an API inside of WordPress, it's not too complex. First, we decide what data we need. Then we find the endpoint or endpoints we need. We decide what arguments to pass, right? Are we using search, before, after, whatever? And then there is an internal Backbone API client. And what this does, it means that we don't have to write the AJAX anymore. And when we want to save data or delete data, we don't have to deal with the nonces or the cookies or any of the validation for us. And we also don't even need to know Backbone. It just happens to be built in Backbone. Why? Well, because the media library was built in and the post revisions, and it's already in core. So if you're during that time when it's still a cutting edge one and popular one, it's already there. Plus the strength of Backbone is in handling models, right? React and Vue are better at handling the view side of things, but Backbone is pretty strong and a solid choice for this. So we don't actually need to know any Backbone, but we're going to leverage this internal tool. And according to the documentation, and remember the gent I showed you that video at the beginning, he did a 15-minute talk on the history of JavaScript and WordPress. Also the fellow who has been building this client. So if you have any questions, you just ping him and he'll help you with it. Pretty friendly fellow, Adam. So this is the official way to do it. They do not recommend you using AJAX or Axios in a theme or in a plugin to access the WordPress REST API. Right? They suggest you use this tool that was built specifically for it. And then everything else is JavaScript, right? So let me show you the final demo of what we're trying to get after building, and then we'll see how far we get. And we don't have to code the whole thing together because you'll have all the code and all the steps around it. So let's just go into our site. And I'm going to copy all the files from section 5. These are all themes. So copy these over into my themes folder, which is starting to get out of control. Side note, WordPress, never leave a theme or plugin up on your site that you're not using. Even if it's deactivated, it could still be potentially hazardous and an open security loophole. So if you have something that you're not using, deactivate it and delete it. Don't leave it up there, okay? Like this, don't launch a site with 30 themes that you're not using. Not the best idea. But for our testing, it's fine. So let's come in now, and we are looking for 5.6 completed. So the way this works is we have a custom template in our code, and there's a conditional statement. Remember I said that you could load JavaScript just on a certain page? So what I've done is I've come into my sample page, and I have assigned it this custom template. And I haven't showed you yet how to do this. I'm just showing you the different pieces of where we'll get. So we created a custom template that we've named custom.js page. And on this page, we can click here to add a new post, and we have access to everything. We could even pull in the media library. And we could save it. We see a nice message, and we see the page refresh with what it is. We could also go in and edit something. So testing 1, 2, 3. Go ahead, save it. See a nice little message. And then testing 1, 2, 3 has been updated. And finally, we could delete it. It'll display this message. Are you sure you want to delete this post? Okay. And it's gone. So this is all being handled via JavaScript and the REST API. And I think it's giving a pretty good example of basic stuff that you may commonly need to know how to do. So let's start off working through this together, and then I'll give you a little bit of time on your own to practice and see how far along you could get with things, okay? So, just showing you the files real quick here. It, like all the things we're doing, is going to go in stages. So the first section is going to start off, you're just going to show a list of posts, okay? Oop. And then no, that's 2.1. Then you're going to pass arguments. So ultimately, we only want 3 posts on the page, just because it's going to make it a little bit faster and make the page smaller, okay? So you'll put some arguments in. And then you'll write the code to save everything. And then you'll write the code to edit, and then finally delete, okay? So I'll start doing some of this with you, and then I'll turn it over to you to do on your own. And this is just reminding me, one more thing I wanted to mention before you get in. This form here is coming from PHP. This is one of the things that it would have taken us, because you'll see, we'll use TinyMCE when we use the decoupled example. It would take us a lot of code to code out a whole editor. The resolution is not, or the contrast is not that great. This will look better on your computer. So to do all these different buttons and all this, like that would have just been crazy, and a visual editor versus a text and hooking in with all this. So in our actual code, we have a custom template that we've named custom.php. And, oh, it's not there, it's in save. So what we've done is this code right here. And you'll see this as you start coding along. It won't be added till a little bit later. But notice we're checking to see, is the user logged in, and do they have the ability to edit other people's posts? There are admins, editors, authors, subscribers, contributors in WordPress. And this is checking to see that they're an editor at least. Then we're hard coding out our new post button, and we're hard coding out our whole field. And notice this line. This is what I wanted to show you. PHP editor will put this out. So like I said, when you're working in WordPress, there are times where it's still not a benefit to use the API. And doing something like outputting the entire WordPress editor with one line of PHP versus trying to build and customize that whole thing would just be insane. So this is an example of where a little bit of PHP definitely helps. And you'll see that unlike traditional JavaScript apps, some of this is hard-coded, but then everything that you list posts is just going to be an empty div, and that'll be more like your div with an ID of app where you fill everything in. Okay? So let's start off looking at our 5.1 list API posts. And we'll pop open our README, and we can see that there's a few steps here. So first of all, we have to get access to the Backbone client, and we're going to do it in the same way that we did jQuery. We're just going to make it a dependency. And then we've got to set up our JavaScript. So this will involve our introduction into the Backbone client and how that works. And then we will test it and make sure that everything runs properly. Okay? So where do we need to go? First, we need to go into our functions.php and make our file have a dependency. Let's go to our functions.php. And notice right here it says, make this file dependent on WP API. So just like before we would have put jQuery down here, instead we're going to do WP API, and this will automatically load the Backbone client that we want. Okay? So we did that. And then next we come into our custom.php file. You know what? I don't know if it says that. Oh, no, that's in our JavaScript, setting up the JavaScript. Okay. So we'll come into, let's see, was there anything else about this functions? There was one other thing. Okay, notice this line of code. What do you think this is doing by just looking at it? This is going to make sure that our JavaScript code that is inside of here is only being run on this custom.php template. And inside this custom.php template, we give it a name. Again, this is like very basic WordPress PHP stuff. If you've worked with themes, this is all pretty common. But if this is new, don't worry because it's already coded for you. So this will mean that once you put this here, that it will show up in the back end, and you could choose it as a custom template, and it'll all work as intended. So there's nothing special on this page yet, but there will be as we go on. So this is only going to load on that page. And now we need to go into our theme.js file. So let's see what we've got going on here. We've got our app container. We're loading our posts. And then there's this function load posts where it says post is equal to get API posts, and it wants us to change it to this value. So let's copy that and put it in there. And this is the Backbone client. This is what it looks like. So you'll say new.wp.collections. Whatever. Posts, pages, media, comments. And if you've worked with Backbone, you may guess that you could also do like wp.api.model and pull in different things like that or post that way. So if you know some Backbone, this will make a little bit more sense. But if not, it's pretty intuitive, and there's not too much we have to do here. So the next thing we do is this just gets the posts ready, but we still have to fetch them in another call. So we're going to change fetch posts to posts.fetch. And then this is following the promise architecture. So it's basically setting up what you want to get. So we're going to get posts. We're fetching the posts here. And then once those posts are fetched, we're going to clear the page. We haven't looked at this, but you can guess what this function is doing. It's basically just wiping it blank. And then for each of our posts, we're going to load the post. So post here won't work. We have to pass this in. And this is where I have to talk about a little Backbone-y stuff. So has anybody worked with Backbone by chance? Nope? Okay. This is really bad Backbone practice. Basically, the way Backbone works is it gives you access to post, and we'll come to it in a second. But let's say that we wanted to do post.title.rendered specifically, right? So this will give us our post. But Backbone doesn't like you doing that. What it wants you to do is use a get to do like that. I think it's either get or get attribute, something like that, very similar. Now, the reason you want to do this is because let's imagine that in our Backbone app we're building, some of that data is changed, and these collections are listening to those changes in data. If we take this approach of rather than doing .get of just hard coding into our attributes, we won't see those changes reflected. But the reason we could do this kind of hacky thing is that we're not using Backbone in that way. It's not like we're using an entire Backbone app where our model and our data is all connected. This is just simply helping us manage and get access to posts. And the creator suggested that we do it this way. So this is going to make our next step a lot easier, but I will point out that it's not necessarily the best practice. So we get all of our posts. Again, this is basically behind the scenes, I think it's a jQuery Ajax call, and it's just dolling it up and making it all pretty and nice for us. But we're basically saying, hey, get our posts, fetch them, and then when you're done, clear the posts, and then for each post, go ahead and load that post. So we'll look down in our load post function. Has anybody ever written native JavaScript like this where you append a markup string onto a page or into an object? Yay, nay? No. Okay. Like I said, I may lose you with some of the JavaScript we write. Don't worry about it too much. I'll show you the important parts right here. Basically what we're doing is we're creating an article, and then we're going to put a bunch of content inside that article. Just think of it that way. So this is going to be putting an H2 with an anchor tag, the title, and then closing it, right? And if you haven't seen ES6 template strings, they're amazing because they allow us to basically refer to variables like this, okay? So it wants us to change some things. We're going to change link to post.link. We're going to change title to post.title.rendered. And we're going to change content here to post.content.rendered. And this is why we looked before. Remember, it was like content, and then you had to go to render. If we did this and removed attributes, we would have to do something like this. This does not look as like JavaScripty and template languagey and clean as you might like. It may potentially be stronger backbone implementation behind the scenes, but since we don't really need to leverage that, and this is a lot cleaner, this is why we're doing it, okay? So really behind the scenes, that's why we're not just passing the regular post here. It's a backbone thing. Clear post is just taking our entire app and clearing out the inner HTML, setting it to 0, so that'll clear away everything. So once we run this code, we should see the posts being pulled into the page and loaded. So let's go ahead and save our changes and activate our theme 5.1. Remember, the one thing you have to do to get this to work is go into a page on your site. Any page will do. I did have to set up a menu. If you're familiar with WordPress and how to use the customizer, you can go into menus. I only have 2 things on my site, but actually, is it displaying a menu by default for you? On your theme, is it showing links here? Yes or no? Yes?
Mine is, yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so you don't have to do that step I just showed you. Click on one of your pages, go in and edit it, and make sure that you choose under template, not the default template, but our custom JS page. And that's what's going to transform this and any other page that we assign to this template to work with the code that we just set up. Remember, because that JavaScript is only executing on that one page. Okay, so we come to our site now. Get API posts is not defined. Okay, so we missed something in theme.js. Let's come back over here. Make sure I have the right theme installed. That's right. Listing API post. Is anybody else seeing that error?
Mine is different. Seeing collections.post is not a constructor.
What's the domain run?
Do you have the include in your functions.php? Oh, I know why. I just made all my edits not in my theme folder. Shake the head, man. Oops. Okay, sorry, I gotta go and catch up really quick and pull in my themes folder. Sorry, give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, 5.1. In our functions, we have, oh, okay, You know, let me just, for sake of time, let me just go to the completed one, and we'll just demo what we've got, which should be working.
It's probably the first time you've ever done that, huh?
Oh yeah, yep, never ever have I. Okay, so we've got this all working right. I mean, it is the completed one. I was editing the wrong file, but the code that we did should be correct, and this has all of our pages. Now, some of the stuff, like if we click on one of these links, it's going to go to the actual site. So ultimately, that may not be the behavior we want. We could play around with that, but we've got this working completely with just JavaScript now. So what we'll do is there are a few more exercises. Let's see what we could do to get through 5.2 on your own. All that's going to do is change some parameters. So rather than all your posts, you'll just be grabbing like 3 posts. Pretty simple there. And then see if you could get through the exercise of trying to save a post on your own and see how that goes. And then I'll come in and review it, and then we could assess how we want to tackle the editing and deleting, okay? So you'll need probably a good 10, 15, 20 minutes and see if you could get all the way through the rest of them, give that a stab. If not, just go one by one and try to at least get through saving posts.
Do you need your screen freeze back?
We can. I don't need to. I could just leave it up. I might need to demo something. Are we still live? Going?
I'm going to the countdown, 20 minutes. So.
Okay, cool. Perfect.